Well, hello. This is an introduction to the book of Judges, and in the book of Judges, we are going to come across some familiar characters like Samson, characters like Gideon. We're also going to get to know some characters like Deborah, like Barak, like Jephthah, and even left-handed Ehud. So they're people that we may not know very much about. We're going to get to know a little bit more about as we read through the book of Judges. Now, again, as you will know from the book of Joshua that we just finished, there are some difficulties, things that when we read the Bible, we kind of go, is that right? Can that be right? And some of that we're going to see again. So we should be, as we read the book, kind of appalled by the rebellions that take place against God by God's own people who are literally living in the land that God had led them out of slavery across a desert, through a sea, and provided for them to live in, and yet they still choose to disobey God, to rebel against him. But equally, I think we're troubled by, and troubled is probably a light use of the word, the consequences, the punishments that God seems to allow or even send upon his people. And we do kind of read it and go, is that right? Can that be right that's happening? Judges as a whole, again, it's an interesting name for a book, because when we think of a judge, we think of someone who's got a wig and sits in a kind of dark panelled courtroom, and there are clerks, and there's the whole business of the court going on in modern day courtrooms, and actually what we see in the book of Judges is as far removed from that as you could possibly get. The closest we come to that in the book of Judges is in the story of Deborah, but most of the people who are called judges in the book of Judges are fighters. They're adventurers. So they are, quite far removed from the modern day concept of a judge. And maybe if you were going to be in court, you'd be quite glad about that. But I guess what the heart of the book is, and why the title of Judges is there, is because judgment means arbitration. It's discerning and deciding. That's what a judge does. They discern and they decide. And you've had the great rulers, leaders of God's people in Moses and in Joshua, and now we have this period of time where the people need someone to discern and decide over their lives, over their future, over their kind of affairs that happen in the day-to-day of life. And that role is taken on by these different judges. And you see this cycle coming through of things are terrible, things are awful, there's been a rebellion by God's people against God, terrible things have happened. They're directionless, they're decision-making-less, and God sends a judge, or raises up a judge, and that judge then leads them in God's ways and leads them in a period of recommitting and a period of kind of living as the people that God always intended them to be. But then inevitably things happen and they get led astray and they make mistakes and they rebel against God, and the cycle just goes round and round and round throughout the whole of the book of Judges. And in that sense, it's not dissimilar, is it, from our lives and the fact that we make mistakes and we get it wrong, and we realize our own brokenness and our own humility. We turn back to God, and then we live for a while, maybe as God would intend us to live, and then the same cycle happens over and over again. And I guess the big question that's there in the background throughout the story in the book of Judges is, if there is this need for discerning and deciding, who is it who does the discerning and the deciding? It was Moses, it was Joshua. Now that God has raised up these judges to be the ones who help to discern and decide on those matters. But the question, more broadly speaking, for humanity is there throughout the background of the book. Who is it who gets to do the discerning and the deciding? And there's a really interesting bit that the book of Judges ends with, just one verse. Judges 21 verse 25 says this. So that's Judges 21 verse 25 says this: "In those days Israel had no king. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes." Now, we live in a world where that is the way that people live. We live in a world where people does or do what is right in their own eyes. You'll hear phrases like, live your truth, be true to yourself. These kind of things where, I am the judge, as it were, of my own morality and the morality of the world as I see it. I determine what is right and I do what is right in my own eyes. That's the way that the world lives in today's society. There seems to be a rejection of this idea that there is some bigger, more overarching sense of truth that we need to live in the light of. And certainly in the light of God's commands and in the light of what we believe that God has revealed to us in Scripture. And the question's right at the heart of the identity of who we are as Baptists as well. Who gets to do the deciding? We've moved away from a hierarchical understanding of church in the sense that we don't have a pope, and we've rejected that. We have an idea of the priesthood of all believers, where it's not just simply ordained leaders who make decisions on behalf of the church, although that's part of the role of ordained leadership. But we believe that everyone is called to discern and make decisions in the life of the church. But, and this is the caveat really when we come back to the book of Judges, that it is God who is the one ultimately who gets to discern and to decide what is best for our lives, what is best for our culture, what is best for our church. And so some people talk about Baptist churches as a democracy. Let me disavow you of that illusion right now. Baptist churches are not a democracy. A church meeting is not a democracy. We may make decisions voting democratically in that sense, but they are not a democracy. They are a place where we come to discern the mind of Christ, where we come to place ourselves under the decision-making and discernment process of the King of Kings. That is why we're here. And if we don't do that, if we don't look for that bigger and deeper discernment and placing ourselves under the submission of Jesus as King, as Lord, as head of the church, then what we're doing isn't church meeting. It's something else. And is not faithful to the roots and the heritage that we have as Baptists. And all that comes back into the book of Judges. How do God's people live under the discernment and the decision-making of leadership, but ultimately under the discernment and decision-making of God? So I hope as you come across familiar characters like Samson and Gideon, and maybe less familiar ones like left-handed Ehud, I hope that you get a deeper understanding of how you sit under the lordship and the discernment and decision-making of the King of Kings over your life as well. So may God bless you.